Recently married and very much in love, a beautiful 28-year-old Swedish Indian woman and her 31-year-old British Indian partner set off to Cape Town, South Africa to celebrate their long-awaited honeymoon. But this would end up being no ordinary escapade. This is the story of Anni, Hindocha and Shrien Dewani and their honeymoon gone terribly wrong.
We are here in Singolonati Street, where a murder victim was found in a car, abandoned.
Things had finally turned around for Anni. The 28-year-old had just moved to London with plans to live with her cousin Sneha, someone she considered to be one of her closest and most trusted friends. Growing up in the small Swedish town of Mariestad, Anni was always very close to her family, especially her siblings Ami and Anish. A playful, happy child with dark brown eyes and a strong personality, she had all the luxuries any Swedish family would have. In London, Anni was still taking advantage of those luxuries. As a quintessential young person, Anni quickly found a job, but then she lost it. She made money, but then she spent it. She made friends, met new people, and life seemed to be going very well. And somehow, Anni's life only improved when she met Shrien Dewani, a 30-year-old Indian Brit who lived in Bristol. Shrien was very well educated and very successful. He had taken over his family's well-renowned business called PSP, a care home management company which oversaw homes all across the UK. The business was so successful, in fact, that the family had been congratulated by the Queen. On her mother's 58th birthday, Anni decided to take Shrien to meet her family in Sweden. The well-dressed and handsome Shrien made a strong impression on everyone in the family, touching everyone's feet and speaking with utmost respect. But Anni's father was not absolutely convinced. Anni had told him about Shrien's past and how he had previously been engaged to another woman. But at the dinner, Anni's father made it abundantly clear that he didn't care about his past and only wanted what was best for his daughter. But Anni's father found Shrien's reactions a little odd that night. He felt like Shrien wanted him to question his past, almost like he had something to get off his chest. He also found it odd that Anni kept sitting really close to him, touching him, talking to him, leaning into him, while Shrien sat there, completely unresponsive.
Aishwarya, but I kind of empathize with Shrien. If I was meeting my girlfriend's family for the first time, I'd be the most conscious person out there. I'd be the farthest from being physical with her. So I kind of get it.
I get it too. And I think Anni's father got it too. He wasn't too worried at all. He put the thought in the back of his mind. He just assumed it was a new relationship. There was nothing to worry about. And maybe Shrien was just nervous meeting so much family for the very first time. Besides, the rest of the family saw how great Shrien treated Anni. He sent flowers to her office, expressed his feelings without any hesitation, and took her out on lavish dates. Shrien doted after Anni, and things were only getting more and more serious. One day, Anni's father got a call from Shrien's father, asking the family to fly to London to spend a few days with their family in Bristol. Anni's parents knew this was a big deal, especially in the Indian culture. Shrien's family was kind, thoughtful, and altogether completely normal. But something still seemed off between Anni and Shrien. The pair seemed distant the entire trip, but Anni's parents again brushed off all of their suspicions. But then something even more puzzling happened. Nearing the end of their trip in Bristol, Shrien's parents handed Anni's parents a silver dish, or a thali stuffed with fruits, nuts, and a Ganesh statue in the middle. As they passed it to the Hindocha family, they said, "Congratulations."
That doesn't add up. For anybody who might not know why this is such a big deal, it is customary in Hindu culture or North India in general for the groom's side to present the bride's side with a silver dish. From everything you've told me, Shrien and Anni aren't engaged yet, are they?
You're right, Aryan, they aren't engaged, but in Shrien's parents' minds, they are. And it wasn't just Anni's parents that were caught off guard by this gesture. Anni was probably equally surprised. Anni liked Shrien. In fact, she liked him quite a lot. But she wasn't committed to saying she loved him just yet. But when Shrien asked her if she was interested in marrying him, Anni found herself tongue-tied. After some fumbling, she timidly said she would be interested. Anni was feeling both confused and indecisive in the following weeks. At some points during their relationship, she felt completely ready to marry him and would tell her parents so, but other times she would waver. She felt like she didn't really know Shrien at all. But while Anni was working through her regrets in promising to marry Shrien, Shrien's parents were already starting to prepare for the couple's marriage. Finally, on one early morning in May 2010, Anni called her father to share good news. She had decided she was going to marry Shrien. And just like that, the wedding processes started to ramp up. In the middle of starting to plan the wedding, Shrien flew Anni on a private jet to Paris, where he gifted her a Karen Miller dress and Christian Dior shoes to wear for dinner one night. It was during that dinner that he proposed to her with a stunning $30,000 engagement ring that was served to her on a plate instead of her dessert. Basking in the love that she felt for Shrien, she texted one of her cousins, "Damn, I really like him now. I'm in love."
Hold on. Was she in love with him before she got the $30,000 engagement ring?
It's funny that you ask, Karan, but no, she wasn't. She was actually really confused about this whole marriage proposal situation. She liked him a lot, yes, but she had never officially used the term love to describe her feelings.
The L word, huh? So,
Yep.
was she in love with him after he proposed to her?
From the text, it sure seems like it, but it was a very tricky situation. It's his personality. He makes me so happy and I can't be without him. So I'll give it a chance, texted Anni to her sister. And Anni did seem happy. That was until the wedding preparation began. Anni's father started to hear rumors about Shrien from Anni's siblings and cousins. Apparently, Anni had told them that Shrien was controlling, even going as far as describing him as Hitler. Shrien had been keeping close tabs on Anni's whereabouts, continually asking her where she was, what she was doing, and who she was with. He wanted her to make a monthly spreadsheet so he could track her daily spending. But on top of being controlling, Shrien was derogatory and in many cases completely unhinged. One day, while Anni was walking the streets of London, Shrien called her a tramp for carrying a plastic bag with the brand name embossed on it that he didn't like.
The audacity to call your own fiancé a tramp, essentially a prostitute. How is that okay?
And Aran, that wasn't even the beginning of the red flags in this case. When Shrien went shopping for Anni's wedding dress, he took Anni's cousin Sneha to help him. Apparently, when the two were shopping, Shrien joked about how he was going to turn Anni from an ugly duckling into a beautiful swan. On one occasion, Anni asked her father, "Am I ugly? Aren't I good looking?" Anni was not irrationally insecure, but was concerned because Shrien refused to have sex with her. This was her fiancé, but Shrien had an explanation. Apparently, he was infertile and had been receiving hormone treatment for the same. But Anni was skeptical. She told Sneha she thought he was lying as an excuse to not sleep with her. Anni's father felt devastated hearing all of this, but he kept pushing it to the back of his mind. He hoped that once the couple got married and spent more time with one another, that everything would work out. When the big day finally arrived, all 350 guests spoke of how beautiful Anni looked in her gorgeous and incredibly expensive designer lehenga by Ritu Kumar. Apparently though, Shrien still found the time to tell her that her sari didn't look proper. On one of the 3 wedding days, Anni confided to Sneha that she was done. She would put up an act for the rest of the wedding since it was too late to cancel. She told Sneha she could always get a divorce later if things didn't work out. With the last day of the wedding in full swing, Sneha asked Anni if things had improved between the couple, but Anni wasn't feeling confident about the future of the relationship. With the wedding finally over, the 350 guests left, happy for the new life Anni was about to begin with Shrien. But Anni wasn't feeling happy at all. The day after the wedding, Anni's parents went to say goodbye to the couple before they set off for their honeymoon. They hugged, they cried, they said goodbye, but little did they know that this would be the last time they would ever see their daughter. The couple decided to spend their honeymoon in Cape Town, South Africa at the Kruger National Park, a well-known safari. Even though there were problems during the wedding, surprisingly the newlyweds seemed to have a good time together. Anni's parents didn't want to bother their daughter on her honeymoon, but on November 13, Anni's mother couldn't resist getting an update. They called Shrien at around 7:30 p.m. South Africa time. But when they asked to speak with their daughter, Shrien said she wasn't there and had gone down the street to get some of their money exchanged. Anni's father thought this seemed a little off. Hotels are usually able to exchange the money for you, but once again, he didn't think too much into it. Plus, Shrien promised to call when Anni was back. About an hour went by until her parents received a call from Anni. Anni spoke highly of South Africa. The lovely mountains, the fascinating wildlife, the gorgeous city. But what's weird is that when Anni was describing her trip, she was talking in Gujarati and English, both languages that Shrien understood, until she suddenly started to speak in Swedish, a language that Shrien didn't understand. Anni told her parents once she flew back to England the following Tuesday, she had a lot to catch them up on. But Anni sounded anxious. Her parents asked if everything was okay, but Anni insisted that she talk to them in the next 2 days. Anni's father knew when she sounded off. Why did she switch to Swedish? What did she have to tell them? Why did she abruptly cut the call? Anni's parents watched a movie that night, but they couldn't pay attention to the plot. They were far too worried about what their daughter had to tell them. In fact, Aran, even years after that night, the couple recall how they watched a movie together, yes, but they can't remember any of the details.
I would also like to add, Aishwarya, that Anni's father has observed so many red flags.
Yeah.
And I understand brushing, some of them off as instances that are isolated moments of nerves, right? It's a wedding after all. But once you piece together all these micro moments, it is almost evident that Anni is in a predicament of sorts.
Right. I just think that at the time, as a father, the worst you're thinking is going to happen is that your daughter will want a divorce after a really expensive wedding. But unfortunately, Anni's father wasn't considering everything that could happen to his daughter. Just after midnight, Anni's father's cell phone rang. Shrien's father was on the line. Vinod, Shrien and Anni have been kidnapped. They've released Shrien, but Anni is still with the kidnappers. They've taken Anni. Her father's heart dropped, but he mustered the courage to ask what had happened. Shrien's father said that the couple had been kidnapped in Cape Town, but he didn't know where Anni was or who the kidnappers were. What do they want? Do they just want money? Asked Anni's dad. Have they put a price on her? We'll go there and we'll pay whatever they ask for. Shrien's father didn't know much, but he said he'd keep him updated. Anni's mother was hysterical. She couldn't stop crying and kept repeating the words, Anni is never coming back. Anni is never coming back.
Aishwarya, if they let Shrien go, I don't understand why they wouldn't let Anni go.
And that's exactly what Anni's father thought as well. Right after the call, he said he felt like he was going to collapse. His legs were giving way and his head was spinning. Once he got his bearings, he immediately went online to buy tickets to go to Cape Town. Anni's father decided to meet up with Shrien's father during his connecting flight in Amsterdam so they could both travel to Cape Town together. After a grueling flight, Anni's father landed at Amsterdam airport. Desperate for any updates on his daughter, he called home using a nearby payphone. His brother picked up the line and he could already tell there was no good news to share. In the background, Annie's father could hear loud wailing and crying. After what seemed like an exceptionally long pause, his brother bore bad news. They shot Annie. They found her body. Annie's father couldn't handle it. He began to sob uncontrollably in the middle of the busy airport. That's not possible. It can't be possible. I'm on my way to get her. I'm bringing her home alive. Cape Town police had a car with Annie's lifeless body in the back seat. She had been shot once in her neck and the bullet pierced her hand. Soon after finding out the devastating news, Shrien's father arrived at the airport. Both men sat at the gate crying. They knew Annie was dead, but they didn't know everything else that was awaiting them in South Africa: an infamous crime, a decade-long trial, and numerous unanswered questions. The flight to South Africa was debilitating for Annie's father, obsessing over his daughter's final moments. Why the hell did they murder my baby? He asked himself. I would have given them every single penny I had. I would have offered myself as replacement for her life, all of my money and all of my property for Annie. A few hours later, the two finally land in Cape Town. Staff from the Swedish and British consulates met them at the airport and escorted them to a taxi which took them to the Cape Grace Hotel, the same hotel where Shrien and Annie had been staying. Emotionally and physically exhausted, the two fathers went to sleep. The next morning, Annie's father was still inconsolable, but one person seemed not the least bit upset. While Annie's father couldn't stomach his breakfast, Shrien easily ate his omelette, recounting the gory details of what had happened the night before. According to Shrien, the couple had gone to dinner and were riding back to their hotel in a cab. The taxi driver, a man named Zola Tongo, asked the couple if they wanted to see the real Cape Town. When the couple said yes, Tongo turned off the main road and into one of Cape Town's most crime-infested areas. It was on that off-the-beaten trek when two armed men hijacked the car. After driving a short distance with the hijackers, the armed men pushed the cab driver out of the car and robbed Shrien of his money, his wallet, his watch, and his phone. The hijackers drove the taxi for another 20 minutes until they decided to also throw Shrien out of the car. Soon after that, the robbers shot Annie and abandoned the car on a side street. The cops couldn't find the car the night of the kidnapping, but they took Shrien back to the Cape Grace Hotel, where Shrien paced back and forth, crying in the hotel lobby. The next morning, police found the abandoned car and Annie's decaying body. Annie's Giorgio Armani wristwatch, a white gold and diamond bracelet, her handbag and her BlackBerry mobile phone were also all missing. After listening to Shrien's story, Annie's father grew frustrated. He wanted to see Annie's body. But Shrien's response took him by surprise. You can't see her today. She's totally drained out. She had no blood in her body. They have to put in liquid to fill her up and make her look good. These words stuck with Annie's father for years to come. Shrien wasn't crying, he wasn't demanding to know the developments of the case, and he wasn't consoling Annie's father.
Ashara, what I fail to understand is why they would kick Shrien out, but not kick Annie out and kill her instead. Was there an element of sexual assault involved that might explain the kidnapper's motive?
So, Aryan, the cops quickly revealed that Annie was not sexually assaulted, which obviously gave the family some respite. But it left open the question, why did they kill Annie? Why would they not just rob her and let her go like they did with Shrien?
Right.
The next day, the families were allowed to see Annie's body, but Shrien decided not to go. He claimed it would be too traumatizing for him to see her like that. When Annie's father walked into the room, his eyes were affixed to her coffin. His beautiful daughter was just lying there as if she was asleep. As he moved closer to her body, he wailed loudly, apologizing for what had happened to her. He kissed Anni on her forehead before telling her that he loved her. But it was time for him to leave. Anni's body was meant to be transported that night to England for her cremation. When Anni's father reached the hotel to pack his things, he was shocked to see that Shrien had gotten a haircut and bought himself a new suit. That evening, the two families boarded a British Airways flight to Amsterdam, where the airport authorities would stamp the words "deceased" on Anni's passport. From Amsterdam, they flew to Bristol for Anni's funeral, where the rest of the Hindocha family would arrive soon from Sweden. Invitations to Anni's own parents for their own daughter's funeral were sent via Facebook, and they were hardly part of the arrangement process. Before the cremation, actually, Shrien's family decided to hold a pizza party too.
How is this okay? Not only is it completely unreasonable to host a pizza party before the cremation, how is it okay to not include the parents of the deceased individual in her own cremation process?
Aran, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Shrien's family did a lot that didn't sit well with Anni's family, who were clearly grieving from this terrible tragedy. For example, Shrien showed up to dress Anni for her cremation, something only members of the same sex are supposed to do in Hinduism to protect the dignity of the dead. He apparently also forced bangles onto Anni's swollen arms and then dropped her arms on the metal table, causing Sneha to plead with Shrien to stop. He also didn't let Sneha or Anni's sister Ami spend any time alone with Anni's body. The next day, when Anni's body was set to be cremated, the Hindocha family met to put handwritten letters in Anni's coffin. But before they could finish their grieving, Shrien barged into the room shouting and refusing to let the family be with their daughter and sister. Anni's brother was so mad, he said he almost punched him that day. And while he eventually left, Shrien had taken away the family's last few minutes with their daughter before the funeral began. That day, after all this chaos, Anni's coffin was placed in the electric furnace without any of the letters her family had written for her. Shrien removed them. As they closed the door, we saw flames rising and heard the sound of it being burnt. I will never forget the smell of fire in that room. That day, Anni was no more, and as a family, we were broken. But while this tragedy was unfolding in Bristol, back in Cape Town, police were searching for the culprits of Anni's murder. Remarkably, 3 men were arrested for her murder, with one of them being the couple's taxi driver for the night. Initially, all 3 men gave consistent accounts of what happened. The 2 hijackers claimed that the plan was to carjack the taxi, rob the couple, and set them free. But a struggle with Anni for her handbag led one of the suspects to shoot her. They claimed Anni, Shrien, and the taxi driver were all victims of the crime. But then, on November 22nd, some new information emerged that changed the trajectory of this case. A hotel worker named Monde Bolombo was arrested, leading the South African media to speculate that Anni's murder was a hit job, meaning someone paid the car hijackers to kill her. But if you think this is unbelievable, then wait till you hear this. By November 23rd, all of the suspects had changed their stories. The 2 hijackers and Bolombo now claimed that the murder was a hit job for which they were all paid money by Shrien Dewani. Zola Tongo, the taxi driver, changed his story too, pleading guilty to being an accessory to the plan and also accusing Shrien of being the mastermind. Upon hearing this news, Sneha went to her family to share more details about how Anni was unhappy in her relationship with Shrien. She showed them text messages which said things like, "I want to cry myself to death and I don't want to marry him. I'm going to be unhappy for the rest of my life. I can't even hug him." And if that wasn't enough, Sneha showed multiple texts from Anni saying she wished she had never gotten engaged. As the developments in the case picked up speed, the police from South Africa asked Annie's father to travel to Cape Town immediately. It was there that Annie's father was told by the police that Shrien was a serious suspect in the murder of his beloved daughter. As far as the police theorized, Shrien hired the taxi driver Tongo to help with the murder, who then hired the hotel worker, who then found the two gangsters to eventually kill Annie.
I think, and I think all our viewers think so as well, we don't like Shrien. I, for one, wouldn't marry Shrien, right? But just to play devil's advocate for a second, quite literally, how did Shrien have the time to plan such an elaborate hit job? Remember, they just planned a long, drawn-out wedding and they had an honeymoon right after. Where did he have the time to hire the taxi driver and plan this from A to B?
I understand that you want evidence, Aryan, and don't you worry, there is more than enough of that to go around. The police claim that the couple met Tongo at the airport when they first landed in Cape Town and they asked him to be their driver for their entire trip. Phone records reveal that Shrien was in contact with their new driver multiple times. The cops claimed Tongo met the two hijackers on the morning of Annie's murder. The biggest piece of evidence, however, was CCTV footage from within the Cape Grace Hotel from the day after Annie's murder. Tongo went to meet Shrien at the hotel, and according to the police, he was there to collect the remainder of the money for the hit job. Sometime during this conversation, Tongo warned Shrien that there were cameras in the room, and at that exact moment, in the CCTV footage, Shrien turned his head up and scanned the cameras in the room. Other CCTV footage showed the couple arriving at the Cape Grace Hotel, where Annie walked into the hotel with her bags, but Shrien stayed outside talking to Tongo for 9 minutes. More CCTV footage showed hotel worker Bolombo receiving a call from Tongo just a few minutes after he dropped the couple off at the Cape Grace Hotel for the first time. In this call, Tongo told Bolombo to find 2 men to murder Annie. Shortly after this call, Tongo arrived at Bolombo's hotel and the two were clearly up to something. They went into a back room together to find a phone number. The cops claimed that Bolombo was finding the number of the men who would eventually kill Annie. During their final dinner together, CCTV cameras captured the couple leaving the hotel and walking to a restaurant close to their hotel. The waitress at the restaurant told the police that the couple seemed distant, and halfway through the dinner, Shrien left Annie sitting at the restaurant, apparently to take a business call. CCTV cameras showed that Shrien actually left his phone back at the hotel, and he left to go get it. Shrien's phone records reveal that when Shrien went to get his phone, he and Tongo shared another phone call that lasted 5 minutes and 26 seconds. With these revelations, Annie's father had a big decision to make. As her next of kin, it was up to him to decide whether or not Bolombo would receive a relaxed sentence in exchange for becoming the state's witness. Annie's father hated the thought of letting one of the people allegedly involved in his daughter's murder off so easily. But he agreed with the request of the police. It seemed like the best option so he and his family could find justice. Shortly after this decision, Bolombo went on record to claim that Shrien had planned the murder of Annie. There was an immediate and brazen media firestorm. In Bristol, Shrien was arrested and sent to Scotland Yard in London to work on his extradition to South Africa. But what had still yet to be answered was maybe the most pressing question of all. Why would Shrien even have Annie killed?
And even if they were in a bad relationship, that in and of itself is not a strong enough motivation to get your wife murdered, right? After all, it was Shrien who actually proposed to Annie.
I agree with you on that, Aryan. But without Shrien as the mastermind of this murder, there's no actual reason why the two carjackers would actually kill Anni. Their motivations are really hard to understand.
Alright, let me make both the prosecution's and the defendant's case. On the prosecution side, it does seem like a staged carjacking because keep in mind, Shrien was kicked out, whereas Anni was murdered, which doesn't really add up. But in Shrien's defense, if he really didn't want to be with Anni, he could have just called off the wedding.
You're right about that, Aryan. Why Shrien wouldn't just call off the wedding and why he would propose to her to begin with if he wanted her killed that badly are probably two of the biggest unanswered questions in this case. But despite not knowing the answers to these questions, this new narrative, the narrative that Shrien was involved in the planning of Anni's murder, was out there for the public to talk about. And that wasn't all. His defense turned upside down when a specific newspaper put out the headline story, Shrien Dewani was gay. While Shrien explicitly denied the rumors of his sexuality, the media did not stop. Articles and segments about people claiming he was gay became common, and the Hindocha family began to wonder if this was the reason he wasn't physically intimate with Anni. In one article by investigative journalist Nick Parker, a male prostitute named Leopold Lester came forward and claimed that Shrien had paid him £1,100 for 3 sessions, with the last session only being held a month before the couple's engagement. So he was cheating on her. It was also claimed that he was a regular at a gay fetish sex club in London called The Hoist. This revelation obviously left the Hindocha family shocked. If Shrien was gay, that meant he had lied to Anni and refused to be physically intimate with her while he was paying for sex with male prostitutes.
Okay, Ashwara, so this obviously isn't a good look for Shrien. Not only was he cheating on her, he's also gay and has repeatedly lied. But what about the CCTV footage, right? Was there any explanation that he could provide for the CCTV footage that seemed to incriminate him?
So, Aryan, he had lots of different explanations for all of the really suspicious CCTV footage. For the footage of Tongo dropping the couple off at the hotel and Shrien staying outside to talk for 9 minutes, Shrien claimed he was discussing the couple's itinerary because they had hired Tongo for their entire trip in Cape Town. To explain the footage from when Shrien met Tongo the day after the murder, when he looked up at the cameras, Shrien said he was asking Tongo about recent developments in the case and how he was feeling emotionally. In footage where Anni's father was in the hotel and Shrien and Tongo go into a room where Tongo left with an envelope, Shrien claims he was paying Tongo money that he had owed him for the time spent driving them around in Cape Town. On top of all of this evidence coming out, Shrien even attempted suicide, but he survived and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital in Bristol. 2 years after Anni's murder, one of the suspects, as well as Tongo, were finally put behind bars. The third suspect, a 23-year-old father of 3 children who actually pulled the trigger, had his trial and sentencing delayed due to his deteriorating health because of a brain tumor. In November 2012, shortly after the 2nd anniversary of Anni's death, the third person responsible for the murder was sentenced to life in prison. And in July of 2013, Shrien was extradited to South Africa. Standing before the High Court, Shrien was charged with murder, robbery, kidnapping, and defeating the ends of justice. Shrien pleaded not guilty to all the charges brought against him and offered a long and shocking explanation as to why. Shrien revealed that he was not gay but was in fact bisexual and had had sexual experiences with both men and women. My sexual interactions with males were mostly physical experiences or email chats with people I met online or in clubs, including prostitutes like Leopold Lester. Eventually, Shrien's internet record revealed he had been surfing 2 gay dating websites when he was with Anni on their honeymoon and 2 days after her murder. On his laptop, police discovered 53 sexual emails with a gay man. Anni's father was devastated to find out that his daughter had been lied to. Although not homophobic, Anni's father was distraught to find that his daughter's husband had a secret sex life while he refused to share a bed with Anni. On the 3rd day of the trial, the judge had had enough of hearing about Shrien's sex life and asked the prosecution to stop discussing it because, according to the judge, it had no bearing on the case. The prosecution tried to argue its relevance, arguing that the German male prostitute was planning to come forward and claimed that Shrien had contacted him a few days before the wedding, asking for a way out of the marriage. But the judge wasn't convinced. And with his sexuality being ruled out, the prosecution lost their only established motive for Shrien to kill Anni. During the trial, the man that pulled the trigger and killed Anni died of his brain tumor in the prison hospital. Tongo took to the stand, but he had his credibility and his testimony shredded to pieces by the defense. A lot of his claimed calls with Shrien to discuss the murder didn't actually exist when Shrien's phone records were checked. Tongo claimed he spoke to Shrien on one of the couple's nights in Cape Town. During this call, Shrien can be seen sitting right next to Anni, with the phone on his ear very close to her, and he showed no sign of talking about something so sensitive. Tongo also claimed that on the night of the murder, when he drove the couple to dinner to their seaside restaurant, Anni entered first, but Shrien stayed back to tell Tongo that if the murder didn't take place that night, Shrien would kill Tongo. But CCTV footage from that seaside restaurant actually showed that Tongo was lying and that Shrien was the first one to enter the restaurant and never left without Anni. Finally, on December 8, 2014, the judge announced her verdict. She said Mr. Tongo, who was the only witness who could link the accused to this conspiracy, gave evidence to the court which was so improbable and contained so many mistakes, lies, and inconsistencies that she couldn't reasonably know where the lies ended and the truth began. Although she took into account the 3 witnesses, Mr. Tongo, Mr. Bolombo, and Mr. Kwabe, she said they were capable of twisting their version of events to implicate Shrien. And with that, the judge acquitted Shrien Dewani of all charges and all involvement in Anni's murder. Tongo pleaded guilty to the armed robbery, kidnapping, and murder of Anni Dewani, crimes he alleged he helped commit at the command of Shrien Dewani. Tongo was sentenced to 18 years in prison, contingent on him testifying truthfully against Shrien in any future legal proceedings. Kwabe avoided trial by pleading guilty pursuant to a plea deal. As of March 2022, Tongo was released from prison. One murderer was dead from the brain tumor, while the other murderer was in prison, and Bolombo had a reduced sentence. Anni's family came to accept the judgment with an open mind. Shrien's behavior was very suspicious and very disrespectful, but there was absolutely no concrete evidence that pegged him for Anni's murder. There were also discrepancies in the stories of the 2 men that hijacked the car. The one that didn't shoot the gun, for example, said that he was very shocked when his partner shot the gun. If this was supposed to be a hit job, why would he say he was shocked at Anni being killed? They also claimed that once Anni was shot, they got scared and didn't check if she was dead. Again, if this was a hit job and the purpose was not robbery, why would you not check if she was dead? On the 10th anniversary of Anni's death, her family gathered next to the lake where they scattered her ashes to pay their respects, to remember their daughter. On the other hand, on that very day, Shrien was seen exiting his £3.5 million mansion in London, wearing gym clothes and carrying a cat in a bag. As of that day, he was living in that house with his Brazilian boyfriend. But while Shrien's life has only seemingly improved, Anni's family has continued their mourning with only small little moments of happiness, like Sneha's wedding, where she wished she had Anni by her side. Anni's father, in the years since after Shrien's trial, went back to South Africa to beg Zola Tongo and the one remaining murderer to give him information on what truly went down that night. But he came back empty-handed. Unfortunately, Anni is gone forever, and maybe what truly happened that night will also remain a mystery forever.